Iran just executed a wide-scale missile and drone barrage on the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Bahrain, simultaneously on day 28 of this war. This is not a regional skirmish anymore. Every barrel of oil, every grain shipment, every semiconductor component moving between Asia and the West runs through this one choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Now here is what we know. On March 27, 2026, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed strikes targeting military and civilian infrastructure in Israel, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain in a single operational wave. The IRGC specifically identified a maintenance facility for the U.S. Patriot air defense system in Bahrain as a direct target. Kuwait's main commercial port, Shuwaik, was struck by hostile drones. Mubarak al-Kabir port was hit separately in the same morning. The UAE intercepted 6 ballistic missiles and 9 unmanned aerial vehicles in a single day. 2 people were killed in Abu Dhabi from intercepted projectile debris, 1 Indian national and 1 Pakistani national. 3 more were injured. In Iran itself, U.S.-Israeli forces struck the Mobarake steel complex in Isfahan and the Khuzestan steel factory in Ahvaz, 2 of the country's most strategic industrial facilities, targeting electrical substations and production lines. Israel's military simultaneously confirmed a wide-scale wave of strikes on government and military infrastructure in the heart of Tehran. And in Yazd, the Israeli military said it had struck what it called Iran's primary facility for the production of missiles and sea mines. Over the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what is being destroyed, what is being blocked, and why the economic damage now spreading across 4 continents is not reversible by a 10-day pause. Now here is what we know about who is dying and how fast. More than 1,100 people have been killed inside Iran since the war began on February 28, 2026. The human rights activists' news agency has separately confirmed at least 1,492 of those as civilians. In Lebanon, the confirmed death toll from Israeli strikes has crossed 1,116. More than 1 million people have been displaced inside Lebanon alone. In the Philippines, diesel prices have doubled. Sri Lanka has begun jailing citizens for hoarding 4 liters of petrol. Egypt's monthly energy bill has jumped from $560 million to $165 billion for the same quantity of energy. These are the confirmed numbers as of today, March 27, 2026. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera's correspondent reporting from Tehran, stated plainly on March 27th, Iranians are focusing on ongoing attacks, not U.S. claims of progress in talks, and see the continuing strikes as a sign that Washington is not serious about a deal. On the ground that day, U.S. and Israeli forces struck 2 major Iranian steel plants, while the negotiation pause was technically in effect. Here is where this gets structural. The Strait of Hormuz is a navigational channel approximately 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point between Iran and Oman. In normal times, roughly 120 ships pass through it every single day. It carries 1/5 of the world's oil and natural gas supply, 1 in 5 barrels, every day. Since March 4, 2026, Iran declared the strait formally closed and began threatening and attacking vessels attempting to transit. The IRGC Navy positioned itself as the gatekeeper. Ships entering must now enter Iranian waters, request special clearance codes, and accept an Iranian naval escort. An Iranian parliamentary official confirmed that Iran is charging vessels the equivalent of $2 million per transit passage. At least 2 vessels paid for passage using Chinese currency, yuan, not dollars. According to S&P Global Market Intelligence, nearly 3,000 vessels are currently waiting nearby, unable to pass. In the 7 days through March 25th, only 28 vessels completed the transit. In normal times, 120 pass each day. That means traffic is running at roughly 3% of its peacetime volume. Jan Rinbo, chief executive of Norden, a Danish tanker company, had 7 vessels trapped in the Persian Gulf as of this week. Speaking to the New York Times, he stated, "We're looking for reassurances that traffic can safely resume. Those signals are not yet there." 7 tankers, immobilized, multiplied by thousands across the entire shipping industry. Capular, the maritime data firm, confirmed 18 ships in the Middle East have been attacked since the start of the war. The energy market intelligence firm's data analyst Rebecca Gerdes confirmed that the first crossing attempt by a major carrier, Chinese shipping firm COSCO, since the start of the conflict ended with both vessels being turned back by the IRGC. But the capability reshaping this entire conflict is what it carries inside. Iran's ability to be simultaneously a belligerent, a gatekeeper, and a toll collector all at the same time. Most people assume that a naval blockade is a military operation, something that requires continuous force, constant presence, overwhelming firepower. It sounds like a massive, exhausting undertaking. In reality, Iran has converted the Strait of Hormuz into a controlled toll road, formalized through a letter to the UN International Maritime Organization, where Iran defines who is hostile, charges $2 million per approved transit, and has already turned back major carriers, including COSCO vessels, as recently as this morning. Noam Radin, senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, stated it plainly: Iran is further complicating the shipping crisis, because what Iran is building is not just a blockade, it is a permanent sovereignty claim over an international waterway, one that is already being codified through legislation inside the Iranian parliament. On March 27th, Iranian news agencies quoted a lawmaker confirming that parliament is actively pursuing a plan to formally codify Iran's sovereignty, control, and oversight over the Strait of Hormuz as permanent Iranian territorial law. That is not a wartime tactic. That is a permanent restructuring of international maritime law. Now apply that to the interceptor equation. The UAE alone has now intercepted, since the start of the war, 378 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, 1,835 UAVs. In a single day, March 27th, their air defenses fired against 6 ballistic missiles and 9 drones from Iran. Kuwait's National Guard has faced repeated daily interceptions, with air raid sirens now described as a regular occurrence. Now let us talk about what this costs, because the numbers here are more alarming than anything happening on the battlefield. The United States is now weighing whether to redirect air defense interceptor missiles originally designated for Ukraine to the Middle East instead, because the ongoing war is stretching U.S. military supplies. Patriot interceptor missiles cost approximately $4 million per unit. The cheapest Shahed-type drone costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 to produce. The IRGC is not firing one drone at a time. On March 26th alone, the Israeli military confirmed at least 10 distinct volleys of missile launches toward Israel throughout a single day. 4 additional volleys were confirmed by early the following morning. That sounds like an air defense system that is working, until you look at the rate at which it is consuming irreplaceable stockpiles to intercept weapons that cost a fraction of the price to produce. War risk insurance on ships attempting the Strait of Hormuz has, according to Oscar Seikaly, chief executive of NSI Insurance Group, leaped from near zero before the conflict to around 20% of the total value of the ship or cargo charged each time a vessel attempts the crossing. Brent crude, the international benchmark, is now trading at approximately $111 per barrel. It was sitting near $72 per barrel at the start of the year, before the war began on February 28th. West Texas Intermediate is trading at just under $97. The S&P 500 is on course for its 5th consecutive week of losses, the longest weekly losing streak for the index in approximately 4 years. U.S. gas prices are at a national average of $3.98 per gallon, up 34% since the war began. Diesel has risen to $5.38, up 43%. That is not an energy story. That is a supply chain story, a food security story, and a sovereign budget story, simultaneously. Egypt's Prime Minister, Mustafa Madbouli, announced on March 27th that shops, restaurants, and shopping malls will be required to close by 9 p.m. nightly, starting Saturday, for at least 1 month, because Egypt's energy bill has tripled from $560 million to $1.65 billion per month for the same energy quantity. Quick, before we continue, thanks a lot for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this going, and I truly appreciate you watching. Please subscribe and like so I can keep bringing you these updates. On Truth Social on March 26, 2026, U.S. President Donald Trump wrote, "Talks are ongoing, and despite erroneous statements to the contrary, they are going very well." He announced a 10-day pause on striking Iran's energy infrastructure, citing Iran's request and progress in negotiations effective until April 6, 2026 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. On the same day, Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a written statement stating, "Israeli attacks on Iran will escalate and expand to additional targets and areas." His statement confirmed strikes were continuing on security and military targets non-stop. Iran's foreign minister publicly described the U.S. negotiating proposal as one-sided and unfair. Iran's 5 non-negotiable demands include full reparations for the war and continued Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, conditions the White House has given no indication of accepting. On March 27th, Iran's IRGC turned back 3 container ships, including 2 owned by Chinese firm COSCO, that attempted to transit the strait while the U.S. declared ceasefire pause was technically active. There is a real-time gap between what is being said at podiums and what is landing on the ground. That gap is widening every single day. Most people assume the deepest fracture in this conflict is between Iran and the United States. It appears that way from the outside. In reality, the deepest fracture is between the United States and its own allies. At the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Vaux-de-Cernay, France on March 27th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio faced a room of allied foreign ministers from Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Britain, virtually none of whom have agreed to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz. When asked about NATO's refusal to assist, Trump stated publicly, "We are very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing." European nations responded that they were not consulted before the war began. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, a Republican, has begun drafting legislation that would force a full congressional vote to formally authorize the Iran war, the first such authorization vote since Iraq in 2002. In a recent interview, she stated, "This president came into office saying he was going to be the peace president. People are asking me, is that what we're moving into?" A Fox News poll released this week shows 64% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the Iran war. Only 36% approve. The Pentagon has not held a press conference since March 19th. That is now 11 consecutive days. Through an active, multi-front war, with 13 U.S. service members killed and 303 wounded. Here is the dimension nobody wants to calculate out loud. Deepika Taplial, fertilizer specialist at Independent Commodity Intelligence Services, confirmed this week that nearly a third of the world's fertilizer moves through the Strait of Hormuz. Since the war began, urea prices have risen 50%. Ammonia prices have risen 20%. Fertilizer plants in India, Algeria, and Slovakia have shut down or slowed output. China has restricted fertilizer exports. Australian wheat farmers are planting less. The WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala stated on March 27th, "The world trading system is experiencing the worst disruptions in the past 80 years. That was not said by a war analyst. That was said by the head of the World Trade Organization at a conference in Cameroon on the same day that Iran turned back COSCO container ships, Egypt announced commercial curfews, and the Israeli defense minister promised expanding strikes." And Nathan Moffat, corporate vice president at Blue Yonder, a global supply chain company, stated it plainly, "We're seeing significant disruption in energy, chemicals, higher freight costs, and spiraling delays. Rerouting vessels from the Middle East around the Cape of Good Hope has raised some shipping costs between 30 and 70%. This is not a regional issue anymore. It is repricing the global economy in real time. Let us consolidate what has been confirmed today." Day 28, Israel struck the heart of Tehran in a wide-scale wave. Iran's primary missile and sea mine production facility in Yazd was hit. Two major steel plants, Mobarake in Isfahan and Khuzestan in Ahvaz, were struck in the same operational window. Iran retaliated with missiles and drones against the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel simultaneously. The IRGC's top naval commander, Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, the man most directly responsible for the Strait of Hormuz blockade, was confirmed killed by U.S. Central Command. 3,000 vessels remain stranded outside the strait. Oil is at $111 per barrel. 20% of the world's oil and gas supply is being held behind a toll booth operated by the IRGC. U.S. air defense interceptor missile stockpiles are being redirected from Ukraine to the Middle East. The Pentagon has not spoken to the press in 11 days. A U.S. Republican senator is drafting war authorization legislation. And the WTO has declared this the worst trading disruption in 80 years. The question the world has to answer now is not whether negotiations will succeed before April 6th. It is what happens when the side intercepting $4 million Patriot missiles against $30,000 drones runs out of interceptors before the side producing those drones at industrial scale runs out of the will to launch them. Do you think the April 6th deadline leads to a real deal, or just another extension? Let me know. Thanks a lot for watching. Subscribe and like if you want to stay updated. Click the video on screen to see another. I will see you soon.